The US has, in total, 14 secret magic money computers that simply create money out of thin air. Elon Musk is thoroughly uncovering this in collaboration with the Department of Government Efficiency and is talking about what could be the most significant financial scandal ever recorded in US history. He's making a huge reckoning here, explaining how money exists out of nowhere, how funds are being shuffled around, how citizens are being scammed, how massive donations to NGOs are being wasted, how payments are happening that aren't authorized by anyone, and how licenses are being issued to people who don't even exist, who are dead or whatever. That means that what we are looking at now is extremely explosive. Elon Musk is uncovering the absolute supergo here, and above all it is about the Treasury, how the Treasury in the USA is being used for massive fraud. And that is also very, very relevant for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin doesn't have anything like that. Bitcoin has exactly the transparency needed to prevent this fraud from occurring. But we'll get to that later. Now, let's first take a look at the highly explosive statements in Elon Musk's latest interview that are really causing a stir and going viral right now. So this has already been clicked on several million times. It must be around 20-30 million times or so. If you're watching this, it's probably been clicked on many, many more millions of times.
One of the things you told me about is what you call
insane.
magic money computers at the Treasury.
Well,
so tell us about it, because I never heard of that until you brought that up.
Okay, so you may think that that the government computers like all talk to each other, they synchronize, they add up what funds are going somewhere, and it's it's coherent. There's and that the numbers, for example, that you're presented as a senator, are actually the real numbers.
One would think.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
So he's talking about the magic computers, and it's about to get really, really interesting. And Elon Musk says here, first of all, if there is a treasury here, i.e. any government spending or something like that in the USA, then everything will be synchronized here. And if you're here as a senator or something like that, you can see very clearly, okay, these are the income, these are the expenses, everything here is completely transparent and so on. He says, no, that's not the case. Nothing is synchronized, nothing is transparent, and the numbers don't add up. And now it's about to get intense.
I mean, they're not totally wrong, but they're probably off by 5% or 10% in some cases. So I call a magic money computer any computer which can just make money out of thin air. That's magic money.
So how does that work?
It just issues payments.
And you said there's something like 11 of these computers at Treasury that are sending out trillions in payments?
They're mostly at Treasury. Some are, but there's some at HHS, there's one or two at State, there's some at DOD. I think we found now 14 magic money computers.
14, okay.
They just send money out of nothing.
So the first time I saw this, I just had to laugh. So he's defining what a magic money computer is. So a magic money computer is a computer that can just create money out of nothing. That means you can make payments, and the money is basically just created out of thin air. So imagine you have a bank account at home and you want to, for example, pay for something. You have now bought 10 kilos of bananas and now you want to make a transfer. Now the account doesn't look at how much budget you have in your account because you basically have an infinite budget. Of course, there is a debt limit somewhere in the US that you are not allowed to exceed, so you don't have a completely infinite budget, but probably a budget that is somehow very, very high, like if you can somehow overdraw your current account or something like that. And now you simply make a payment and the payment goes out, but no budget is deducted from your account. So let's say you have a balance of, 100, but that balance doesn't go down at all. You just make the payment, buy yourself 10 kilos of bananas, and now you're thinking, this actually works pretty well. Now you make the next payment and you buy, for example, a motorcycle. Now make the transfer, but you see, hey, the account balance doesn't go down at all. There's still $100 in there. And that's what Elon Musk is describing here, that there are 14 magic money computers that can simply dispense money. And the budget isn't going down at all. I mean, of course, somewhere the debt levels go up or something like that, but there have also been discussions about whether the Department of Government Efficiency is auditing the Fed, but also partly the debt levels and so on, whether that is not true at all and so on, that the debt levels are higher or are wrong and so on. There have also been considerations about whether this might not be true, but the kicker is that they're talking about the magic money computers, and Elon Musk is also explaining how the fiat money system works, which means that money is just created out of nothing. In the US, I believe you don't even need a minimum deposit anymore. In Europe, I think it's still around 1% or so that you need as a minimum deposit for private banks to create money, but in the US, it's even less. What I didn't quite get is why he's talking about the Treasury. The Treasury is the finance ministry, so he's saying that the Treasury can create money out of nothing. But he must be talking about it in combination with banks because banks are actually the ones that create money or the central banks, so either the private banks or the central banks. I didn't quite understand that, so if you got it, feel free to drop a comment below. But anyway, I described the fiat money effect here and how it leads to money being created out of nothing. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin, that exactly this can't happen. So that means the Department of Government Efficiency would already have the optimal solution to the problem they have with Bitcoin, where money is just being thrown around endlessly, no one can control it, it's also opaque, and so on. So they wouldn't even need to come up with a bunch of new things, they could just rely on Bitcoin, and they would have already fixed everything. But now it gets even deeper. The next revelations are coming up.
Is that one of the biggest scam fraud holes we've uncovered, which is really crazy, is that the government can give money to a so-called nonprofit with very few controls, and then there's no auditing subsequently of that nonprofit. So there's no. So this is where with the 1.9 billion to Stacey Abrams, they then give themselves extremely lavish, like insane salaries, expense everything to the nonprofit, buy jets and homes and all sorts of things.
Live like kings and queens.
Yes,
on the taxpayer dime.
Correct.
So the next thing they found out is that in the U.S., the government can just throw money at nonprofit organizations, or probably also NGOs, non-governmental organizations, without any kind of audit. So any nonprofits can buy jets, they can buy houses, and so on. It's all financed through government money. Of course, there is a limit somewhere and so on, but there are certainly some allocations. So the NGO or the nonprofit gets, say, $500,000, another one gets $1 million, and what exactly happens with that money isn't really audited. There are no real checks, no transparency, and so on. They can just throw money around endlessly at the taxpayer's expense. What needs to be said here is that this is happening in the US and is currently being uncovered. I strongly assume that similar things exist in Germany or in the EU as well. Elon Musk once said he wouldn't want to trade places with the EU because he sees things as being much, much tougher over there compared to the situation in the US. I'm not sure. I can't say anything about it. I don't know the details, but I can definitely imagine that something similar is happening here in Germany or the EU. But feel free to let me know what you think about it. He's also talking about one of the biggest scams or frauds. I'm not sure how to say it. It's definitely all very intense.
So most of what Doge is finding, you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes. Okay, it's very obvious, basic stuff. So in every government department, I say every because we've not yet found a single exception, there are far too many software licenses and media subscriptions, meaning many more software licenses and media subscriptions than there are humans in the department.
Like you were saying, like an agency with 15,000 people might have 30,000 licenses.
Yes.
And even of the 15,000 employees, a good chunk of them hadn't used the license, had never logged on or used the application.
Yes. We found entire situations of software licenses or media subscriptions where there were 0 logins.
Wow.
So it had
and yet we were paying for it.
Yes, so the government was paying for thousands of licenses of software or media subscriptions, and no one had ever logged in even once.
Or like credit cards. You found the same thing with government credit cards.
We found that there are twice as many credit cards as there are humans.
And
I still don't have a good explanation for why this is the case. And these are $10,000 limit cards. So it's a lot of money.
So I'm not a US citizen, but if I were, I would definitely feel very, very cheated right now. So he's actually talking about how you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to uncover all these scams because it's really, really obvious. So they're not even getting into the crazy scams yet. These are just the really obvious scams that are being uncovered right now. And that's just outrageous. He's talking about how there are twice as many licenses issued as there are people employed in certain parts of the government. So let's say in some institution, like the Treasury Department, there are people employed there, and they've issued licenses for various computer software and so on. And out of the licenses that exist, most of them aren't even used. So you'd think, okay, at least the licenses are being used by the employees. No, they aren't being used either. And you can really see how inefficient this state is, how corrupt it is. I mean, it could really be corruption here. The discussion is also going to touch on whether this is fraud, like if it's actually a scam, or if it's waste, like a waste of taxpayer money. And there's also a really interesting assessment about that. And the same thing happened with credit cards, where there are either a ton of credit cards that aren't being used, or there are more credit cards than there are actually people. And again, they have high credit limits and all that. I also saw that in the US airlines, revenues have dropped by up to 50% because suddenly all the government flights are no longer being funded and are just being canceled by the Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, that's outrageous, 50% or nearly 50%, I think Kobasi said. Or maybe it was 40%, but it's a very, very high number where the revenues have dropped. You can really see how corrupt it is. And the big question is really, is this corruption? Is it fraud? Or is it just waste? So is this negligence? Or is it really intentional fraud? Because that's how it can be, for example, money can be funneled to a company. For example, a politician says, okay, hey, I know someone who makes masks or something like that. I think it was similar back then with Spawn, who knew his brother or someone like that who makes masks. And then you simply say that you won't sell the masks at the market price, but at an above market price. Or sometimes they would buy licenses from some other friends that they didn't even need and so on. Because politicians always have to find ways to, launder their money, not directly, but indirectly through back channels and stuff. And so you often have non-profit organizations or NGOs and the like. And then some friends sit there, and then the politicians use their opportunities to basically push money over to them. And then the non-profit organization slides money back to the politicians, so it's not a direct fraud, but it's done on the sly and gets washed through the NGO or something like that. So that's often how it's done. I mean, I don't want to accuse anyone of anything or anything like that, but this is just a common practice that often happens.
Look, I think it's mostly, if you say, look, what's the waste to fraud ratio?
Yeah.
In my opinion, it's like 80% waste, 20% fraud. But you do have these sort of gray areas.
Yeah.
So,
Example
would be, we saw a lot of payments going out of Treasury that had no payment code and no explanation for the payment. And then we're trying to figure out what that payment is, and we'd see that, okay, that contract was supposed to be shut off, but someone forgot to shut off that contract, and so the company kept getting money.
Wow.
Now, is that waste or fraud?
Yeah, both.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, both.
It's sort of
If
a
you
gray
know you're
area
getting something
because
you're not supposed to get.
You're not supposed to get it, but the government sent it to you, and nobody from the government asked for it back. Or take, for example, the $1.9 billion given to Stacey Abrams, a fake NGO.
Utter insanity.
It's just too intense. They then philosophize about whether this is fraud, or if it's just waste, meaning whether it's a waste of taxpayer money. And then they conclude that, yeah, it's both. Elon Musk says here 80% waste, 20% fraud. There is also talk about certain contracts, because there are certain contracts and you have to, for example, when you make a payment, you have to enter some kind of number, register it. It was then discovered that some of it was not registered and payments were simply approved without having what they called validated. And then there are certain contracts that simply run through where nobody has even checked whether they are suitable at all, and where there is simply cash flow, just run through and keep running and money just flows to some NGO or some company, even though the money is perhaps no longer needed because the service is perhaps no longer being provided and so on. But if the company doesn't stop, then the contract won't be stopped because there's no one to check the whole thing. And of course, if I were a company now, let's assume I had a deal with the government. I had to produce 20 face masks or something like that for the government, and I somehow got euros every month. Of course, they are very, very expensive masks that I then produce. The deal runs for a year. Then I deliver the 20 masks every month, and then the deal expires, and I still get the money. And when I then realize, okay, I'm not delivering masks here anymore, but somehow the money is still coming in, then as an entrepreneur, I just say, okay, free money, I'll take the money. I'm not going to complain about that right now because nobody does the math here either. And that's always the thing. The government is always a very, very inefficient business owner. I mean, Bitcoin would fix part of that, not completely. I mean, you can't fix the fact that politicians might still waste the money. They could still spend the Bitcoin on war or something, and then the Bitcoin holders would just be out of luck. That's always the premise, that you'd probably spend less money on war because it's just too inefficient when you can't just print more Bitcoin. But hey, let me know what you think in the comments. If you're bullish on Bitcoin and you don't want any fraud or waste, I'll drop a link below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily buy Bitcoin securely. Here you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin with the code BitcoinHotel. Here you have some really cool features like auto wallet transfer, limit orders, savings plans, and a lot more. So definitely check it out, folks. Peace out.